I'm Bennet Zelner. I'm a professor at the Smith School, and this is the panel on diasporas. And we have with us today four distinguished and excellent speakers, and we're not going to go in exactly the order of the name cards. So our first speaker is going to be Professor William Kerr. He's a professor of business administration and the Marvin Bower Fellow at the Harvard Business School. He'll be followed by Devesh Kapur, who's the director for the Center for the Advanced Study of India at the University of Pennsylvania. He'll be talking about diasporas in the context of India, followed by Caglar Ozden, who's senior economist at the in the Development Research Group at the World Bank. He'll be discussing some insights about a project involving Malaysia. And we're going to close off with Eric Guichard, who's the founder and chief executive officer of HomeStrings. And he'll tell you a bit more about what HomeStrings is, and much better than I could, I'm sure. So we're not going to delay it all because we're running a little bit behind schedule. We're going to give 14 minutes to each of the panelists to speak. And at the end, we'll have, if all goes well, we'll have about 15 minutes for some Q&A. So with no further ado, Bill.
So great, thank you for having us here. I'm going to preface a little bit of a change of kind of perhaps the visual format. I don't think any of us are going to have slides. That was kind of a group decision that was made. So relative to the past presentations, we'll all be sharing the same screen that way. Since I'm the kickoff person, I want to start by giving a couple of just broad thoughts about diasporas, and then we'll kind of move into a few more specific examples that I would like to share today, and some lessons that follow from that. So one reason is why bring up diasporas, or why, you know, on an emerging markets panel and in today's format should we be paying a lot of attention to that? And the underlying answer to that is clearly it's a big economic importance. It's not just because many of you in this room are members of a diaspora in one way or another, but both for the countries that receive the diasporas as well as also for the countries that send them, this is a critical topic. Most of my research, most of my external work, most of my teaching in many respects revolves around the United States experience. And I'll just give a couple of numbers to kind of set this in context. So immigrants are about 10% of the U.S. population. If you look within the science and engineering fields or technology development more broadly, immigrants represent about a quarter, 25% of our nation's bachelor's level science and engineering workers. Now that's even probably relative to what might be second generation, third generation. That's the 25% is sort of the lower bound. As you further go up the educational ladder, the numbers get even more staggering. To by the time you get to the PhD level, about 50% of the United States PhDs in science and engineering fields are foreign-born coming to the United States. So that makes things like the H-1B visa program, how do immigrants affect the U.S.'s innovation and technology frontiers, how does it affect U.S. entrepreneurship and similar, a very important topic for the United States. And at the same time, it's also, of course, a very important topic for the countries that are sending the immigrants to the United States. There's been a variety of theories that have come over the years, and Devesh may talk further about this along the way, but things about, for example, initially we had a large perspective about brain drain. So that when the best and brightest came to the United States to do their work, that represented a loss to the country that sent them. And that loss may have been just in terms of the economic development of the country, in terms of the role models that the citizens there had, and similar. Over the last couple of decades, there's been a counter view that has emerged that says, well, it really may be more of an opportunity, so that there may be more of what we call a brain gain aspect of this, that because you have some of the world's leaders in the United States, people that are developing companies that are spanning across multiple countries, people that are involved in the frontier science and technology development, that may actually help things like technology diffusion progress more rapidly to home countries, and that may then sort of engender for them faster growth and development process. Today, I'm not going to try to separate between those two views or say that one view is more or less appropriate, but I want to instead turn to a core element of what is necessary for that brain gain view to emerge. So if it's going to be that having a large portion of one's talented population live abroad, what are some of the conditions which that needs to revolve around, and especially how does that relate to entrepreneurship? And most of my academic work in this area is kind of the very sort of large data set, you gotta get the propeller hat on, kind of like nerdy sort of stuff. But today I want to focus instead on some examples of cases that I teach in a class called Launching Global Ventures that can help identify a little bit of when do these entrepreneurs emerge, what are some of the traits that we see in the businesses that they're running, and similar. Actually, I came in from the airport this morning, and I caught the very end of the excellent presentation by Ian, where he had talked a little bit about CellTel. And that's sort of nice for me, because that was actually the first venture that I was going to bring up, which was CellTel. And I will skip over a lot of it since he was able to introduce some aspects of it. But for those that are just joining us, CellTel was set up by a guy named Mo Ibrahim, who is from Sudan and was living in Europe at the time. And Mo had been a success in the cellular communications business, and he started a business that was ultimately going to become a Pan-African cellular provider. At the time that he sold the business, which was in 2005, CellTel was in 13 countries and had 15 different sort of properties, and was starting to do things for cellular communication that had not been done before, about letting, for example, people roam across countries within Africa with the same service. The company was one of these that the numbers that go into it were staggering. He was raising $300 million in equity and $400 million in debt financing from sort of global financial players. So this is one of those staggering sort of concepts. And we also at the last time mentioned that Africa was not a country. That was one of the themes that came out there. That was something that he was trying to emphasize too, that there's a lot of opportunities that can be embedded in one of these in one of these settings that you can take advantage of. So that's actually the case that we kick off the Launching Global Ventures class. And a lot of it's designed to start thinking about international business models where you're trying to stretch across multiple countries and you're starting to try to do things that you can't just do if you're operating in a single country line. So you can't provide these seamless roaming capabilities that can go from one place to the next that way. But let me sort of dial it back a little bit, because the next 2 or 3 cases are actually cases that are around recent MBA students, which I know we have a number of undergrads and MBA students here. But these are examples of things that people have been doing that have some sort of connection to their home countries from the start. So our second case is around one of the essential things that's happening today with entrepreneurship in the United States. And since the rise of the iPhone and since the strong development of both mobile and internet, there's a surge of entrepreneurship that's trying to offer products in that space, very technology-based products, often with using one of these distribution formats. And one of the striking things that you see when you start to go study these firms is that many of them are not doing their initial technology development in the United States. Either through platforms like Odesk, which do sort of worldwide outsourcing kind of contracts or foreign sourcing contracts, or through a company like Dashfire, which is the one I wanted to highlight here. They're doing increasingly development in places like India or Pakistan or in the Philippines or elsewhere as ways of sort of tapping into foreign talent that can help on these projects and is cheaper than in the United States. So the case is actually centered around Evertrue's decision to say, do we want to bring in a local programmer? Do we want to try to use one of the global platforms? Do we want to try to work with Dashfire and similar? And what are some of the trade-offs that we have to face? The company ultimately is going to choose to work with Dashfire and then later needs to migrate back. But Dashfire is an interesting case. This was a company that is, the founder of Dashfire is a very young guy, and he set up a business that is working with US startup companies. And he's got a development team in India that has a couple hundred people. And what they do is they take equity in the startups in order to sort of facilitate this initial development. So what does someone like Brent, who is running Evertrue, get? Well, he gets lower wage costs, and he also gets a partner that understands a lot more, has been sort of needing to do this over and over again about how you're going to develop the mobile apps, what are going to be its uses, what are some of the features that need to be built into that. And this provides a very effective sort of collaboration technique. And then the bet for Dashfire is that it's going to use these sort of lower wage rates to cover its expenses, and now it has stakes in about 20 or 5 or 30 US startup companies that some of them might become very big. And that's sort of the model that sits behind it. So it's more of a global sourcing model. Then we go into a third case, which is not really about an emerging economy, at least it's about Spain, which at some point may require to have some emerging capabilities reassigned to it. But it's about a global arbitrage model. So in this case, what you see is that an idea comes out in the United States. It's called Hotel Tonight. Hotel Tonight is a venture that allows you to do very last-minute hotel bookings in cities like New York and Las Vegas, and it's become very attractive and has had sort of a lot of substantial growth in the United States as a mobile app offering. And what Rebecca, who's the case protagonist and a recent HBS MBA student, does is she sees this and she says, wow, we don't have anything like this in Spain. I need to take this back to Spain and try to figure out some way to develop this type of technology and try to market it that way and promote it. And so she's able to raise capital from both people in Spain as well as also venture capitalists in the United States. And she's recruiting some people from other countries besides Spain to come join her in there, but also recruiting a lot of local Spaniard MBA students as well as workers to try to develop this team. So she, as part of the diaspora, is observing the arguments elsewhere and then bringing them back. So these are some quick examples, but now let me try to get to some overall themes that I wanted to bring out of this. The first is that diaspora connections pervade all of this. And in fact, I only had a chance to briefly introduce 3 of them, but if you go across all 25 cases that are part of the course, I think 95% of them have at least some diaspora part to them. In each of these cases, the founder was able to identify something to take to their home country. It was what was behind resource access. It was what was behind financing. There's a variety of different variations to how this occurs, but it's something that you see over and over again about the diaspora connections happening that way. And moreover, I use this as kind of a counterpoint to some of the other examples that we have in my course, which don't initially seem to be diaspora-based. So one of those that people may have seen is a company called Odesk. Odesk is now a $300 million, $500 million a year labor market that's online where any company can log in and hire a worker anywhere in the world. Likewise, a worker anywhere in the world can log in and hire a company like that. You know, it doesn't at that point seem like, well, that's like the biggest one in the course, but that's not really diaspora building. But the thing is, you go back further in its history, and it was actually the original product of 2 Greek entrepreneurs. One was in Silicon Valley, and one was in Greece, and they needed to communicate to each other. So they started to develop this platform, and ultimately it merged into something bigger, which then takes on a longer life of its own, and in fact, in turn allows a lot of people to use the platform for their own diaspora work. So if you go on Odesk now, and you look at ethnic Indians in the United States, you look at ethnic Chinese, they're more likely to be working with their home countries on Odesk than they otherwise would. So that's one thing about the persistence and the ubiquity of the diaspora connections, which is very important to highlight. A second thing is conditions under which they really seem to matter. So one condition is that they really seem to matter when there's a lot of sort of local customization or connections or networking or traits that need to be behind that. Now, that's one that you might quickly kind of skip over and say, okay, yeah, I got that. Yeah, of course, you know, they need. But what's intriguing as you go back to some of the models we discussed, it's not immediately obvious as to why those would need so much local customization or so much input. Think about arbitrage. We start by thinking that something like, what's the best arbitrage case? Well, it's something I can easily replicate from place to place to place. But actually, those are places where, without those barriers to entry, usually the firm that came up with this has already done it, or you're not going to have sort of long-term sustainable advantage. So that gives diaspora some special ability to come into those locations and build a model up like Hotel Tonight, where Rebecca had to go from place to place and get the hotels to sign up, recruit the people involved, and so on. A second place that you always see this as being very important is where speed is a critical element. If there's a sort of a race to market or something where there's a short window in which this knowledge is going to be a special opportunity for people, diaspora connections really seem to have some extra impact or kick along those lines. Now, I want to kind of maybe close with the third observation, which is one that's more of a debated point. So again, in the academic literature, there's a question about whether it's diaspora or whether it's people that have returned to their home countries or whether it's people that are rapidly circulating back and forth between, like what is it that actually can help this brain gain argument emerge? Like where do the people have to be that have acquired these skills? And interestingly, across the cases, you see about a third of the cases that are in each of those camps. And so in the case of Dashfire, Rick Desai, the founder, spends less than 6 weeks in India, and yet he's able to, per year, and yet he's able to sort of run this global firm that's really provided value, whereas others like Rebecca go back to their home countries. Moreover, what I found striking is that if I looked at where people were just a few years ago, and then where they are like now, so 3 or 4 years later, I think at least half of them have swapped spots. So it's not something that's even static there, that people that have returned come back, or people that are stay here are going to go back. So that's going to be sort of, I think, my 3 overall things to bring out. I want to kind of, maybe in some of the QA, I'll bring up a couple of other examples here to emphasize important, but diasporas are an essential part of how the global entrepreneurship landscape is emerging right now. And many of the cases, even though I wasn't picking the cases to reflect diaspora, when you get down to how these international business models are emerging, this is a pretty key element that's behind them. Thank you.
Well, thank you as well, and I look forward to talking more about some of this during the Q&A. It's a great kickoff set of comments, and now we have Devesh Kapur, who will be discussing diasporas more in the specific context of India. I have the timer here. Do you want me also to? No, you sure. I'll tell you your 4 minutes.
Actually, I'm not sure if I'll be talking mainly on sort of India, but I'll broadly build on Bill's remarks. So in a more interconnected world, migrants are having greater effect on the place of origin. And that is true not just of international migrants, but of internal migrants as well in large countries like China and so India. And I think the key things to try and understand is if we try and look at their impact, what are the factors that this impact sort of depends on? And I think one of the key variables which we sometimes tend to forget is to ask why people leave. People leave for some reason, right? And broadly, and I'm being very, very simplistic here, those you can look at migrants, those who leave for economic reasons, so to build a sort of better life. But you also have large numbers of what I call political diasporas, right? People who've had to leave because of civil wars, of failing states, persecution. This is especially true of ethnic minorities. And also, and we find that in many countries, in many, poorer countries, ethnic minorities are especially concentrated in areas like entrepreneurship. And if you take an example of East Africa in the 1960s and 70s, the most successful ethnic minorities, which were Asians, basically had to leave because they were forced to leave. And in fact, that group is by far the most successful migrant group now sort of in the United Kingdom. And so East Africa lost an enormous amount of entrepreneurial talent. You could argue this was also true of North Africa when in the 1950s, the Jews of North Africa, by and large, left the Maghreb region. And so a big part of this is, and when these people leave because they are forced out to leave, then their impact on the country of origin is actually very, very little. If you think of the role of Cuban Americans, right? Their role actually, you could argue, has been has been very negative, for Cuba, because they've really thwarted attempts to build deeper relationships between Cuba and the U.S. So the reasons why people leave has a huge impact, whether that diaspora becomes a bridge or whether actually it becomes a big obstacle. The second point, I think, is to understand what do the migrants do in the destination country. Are they in low-skill jobs or high-skill? Are they in sectors that are more tradable or in non-tradable sectors? If you're driving a cab in Toronto, what exactly are you going to be able to, what skill sets, other than the fact you have higher income and you can send back some money to your family, But by and large, the transformative effects of that are going to be very, very low. So the manner in which you are integrated in labor markets in the destination country, the particular characteristics of those labor markets will affect the skill sets of the diaspora, and therefore, whether those skill sets are transferable in any form to the country of origin. The third, I think, which we also, I think, tend to somewhat underplay, are the policies of country of origin. Think about China and India, right? The two giants that in the past, like 30 years, have done very well. Well, you had a diaspora, Chinese diaspora in East Asia way before the transformation. But under Mao, China had no interest, had in fact did everything. The economic model was very anti-private sector, so they had no effect. They only began to have an effect, and a huge effect, once China opened up and changed its own economic policies, right? So unless the country of origin itself makes it attractive, why are people going to be there? Same was true of India. Prior to 1990, the impact was very low because India was really closed. And it's only after 1990, especially the Indian-American diaspora has had considerable sort of impact. This is true of a country like Vietnam, where, of course, the original diaspora that came here fled because they were very anti-communist, and they had no interest in trying to do anything. If anything, they acted like the Cubans. But as Vietnam itself began to open up with a lag in the 1990s, you see how much more effect they begin to have. So the policies of country of origin, I mean, it sounds very, very, very trite, but it's something I think we tend to forget. I mean, that matters. It matters why people leave and why people are going to invest. And in that way, you could argue it's really no different for diasporas as for any other sort of FDI. And one of the things I think we have to ask is, what is different of a diaspora from any other type of foreign investor? I mean, if you believe in Deng's thing that, you know, as long as the cat catches the mice, it doesn't matter if it's white or black. Does it matter what the color of the money is, whether it's coming from a diaspora or whether it's coming from some other investor? And it's a thing I think that one of my other panelists is likely to take up. Now, a big part of this work on diaspora's last like decade is focused on financial remittances. Partly we have these very large transfers that are occurring, and I think, you know, there's no doubt that there are many positive sort of effects. Whether you can look at in some countries at a macro effect on the balance of payments or on the households, the families in which the money is going. But I think its effects broadly for development have been way oversold. It's a bit like, you know, microfinance. It's a very nice idea, it matters, but it never has a transformative effect in like development. China has not gone where it has because of, you know, remittances. And the same with India. These sorts of flows do not do the sine qua non of like development, which is structural transformation of the economy, right? That like money, by and large, is not going to achieve those goals. And I think the difference that is happening where the diaspora is playing a role in this transformative effect is to pick up on Sir Bill's point, which is on entrepreneurship, right? Because that has a much bigger transformative sort of impact. But there too, it's sort of interesting that can the diasporas actually amplify certain trends or lock in certain trends? And it's interesting to look at the role of the Chinese diaspora in China, where it really developed, but also almost congealed the emphasis on the manufacturing sector. Whereas in the Indian case, it was on services. And you see that China's economy is roughly more imbalanced towards manufacturing, and India's is the opposite. So in a sense, you had certain latent tendencies in the country, which the diaspora only amplified rather than the other way around. A second, effect, which I think, which to me is more profound over the long term, is the transformative effect of diasporas on a country's institutions. There's been this big thing, past like 20 years, institutions matter, like for like the development, but we don't really have a good grasp of how do you build them and who builds them, right? And if you take a country like Liberia, right, which went through a horrific civil war, and then you had a person come back and become the president of the country, you see how much Liberia has transformed, and you can see the transformative sort of effect. It's not always true. As some of you know, Liberia was the original country created from the diaspora, right, which is slaves here in the 19th century who were sent back. And that story for most of the 20th century was not very, very positive. So this does not necessarily mean. But I think if you look at countries like South Korea, Taiwan, how they went up the value chain. And part of the role was especially returning PhDs, people with high skills, who went back and created and developed their universities, developed especially their R&D centers of their companies, and especially at the technology level, where they played a very important role in the transformations. This is also true of China. This was true of India in the 1950s, 60s, was much less in the 70s, 80s, and like 90s. And it's slightly more now, as more people with PhDs, with research experience are going back. And in fact, if you look at MNC R&D, which has grown hugely in China and India, it's amazing how many of their staff or their key research scientists are actually people, whether it's Chinese or Indians, who've been trained outside the country. They want to go back, but the MNC is a much more tractable or a preferred route of re-entering the country of origin. And then after some time, several of them leave and start their own companies. The last point, and then I'll end with that, which is again a point to build on something which Bill said, which is I think in the past we saw that diasporas more as a sort of either-or option. You left the country, and once you left it, you settled sort of outside. This, of course, we know sort of historically has not been true. If you look at the history of Italian-American immigration here, in the 1920s, 30s, about a third would go back to Italy over the winter because many of them were in the construction sector, that activity would ebb in the winter months, and they would often go to the family agricultural work and then be back in spring. But I think it is true that with new technologies and the way interconnectedness is increasing, you have a much greater so-called circulation as opposed to diaspora effect. And this circulation, this back and forth sort of effect, is of course much more you find in younger people. It's easier like for them to travel back and forth. And also for people now I see in sort of retirees. And there you see an interesting thing of the role of that, where they're playing a much greater impact on social entrepreneurship. So they've gone outside, they've done well, they're now about to retire professionally, but they have skills, they have spare time, and they want to do something else. And there you find in several countries which I've been looking at, you see a very sharp growth of social entrepreneurship. Partly it's coming like from young people, but a lot of it is coming like from retirees who are trying different things to try and give back, rather than the usual earlier like model of writing a check for a charity or for a philanthropy. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Another very interesting set of comments and a really interesting complementary perspective to Professor Kerr's as well. So now we're going to have Caglar Ozden from the, who's going to tell us, you're sticking with your packet? No.
No,
I think
I thought you
I was introducing you. I just wanted to
There's
say,
nothing much
I
to say
think,
about this, so.
I think you're still sticking with Malaysia, because I got the last one wrong. So, but I appreciated the spontaneous. Yeah, okay.
All right, well, great to be here.
I'll give you a 4-minute warning, okay?
All right. A couple things. I cheated, actually. I had a PowerPoint presentation. I didn't prepare it. It was something that was prepared. So let me just show this for now, so you see it. First, I want to thank Kisleya for inviting me. First, I get to wear my beautiful ties. You know, in the research unit in the bank, we're very informal. I never wear a tie, and I have this whole thing, and my wife nags me. You have the suits and the ties, you never wear them, so I appreciate the occasion. The second thing gives me an opportunity to talk something exciting and very relevant and important, and not, you know, discuss the external validity of the instrument you're using in this estimation, that kind of stuff. So it is great. So I'm going to talk about Malaysia, but before that, I've been working on diasporas for a long time, and I write these, you know, papers. I didn't even know what the word meant, right? And I bet very few people in this room would know it. So, of course, most of you are probably more educated than I am and studied Latin and Greek in school. But diaspora, as turns out, means it's the spreading of the seeds, right? It's a biological term. That's where it came. And it originated, I mean, it's kind of spores. It's the same root. And it's the idea that, you know, you have the mother plant and the seeds are spread. And then seeds are supposed to carry your genetic material so you can dominate your environment in any way, guarantee your survival. But it's not the idea you come and benefit the mother plant in any way, right? Whereas now the way we use the word diaspora, actually, okay, you left and you sold out and you're out there. I get that treatment all the time. I'm sure some of you do as well when you go back home. And how are you going to benefit us, right? It wasn't about that, but that's where it came to. So let me talk about Malaysia, and I'm going to get to that. Okay. So what it is Malaysia is a very, for anybody from Malaysia before I put my foot in my mouth? Okay, all right. It's a beautiful place and very fascinating place, and it is very impressive in many, many dimensions. I've been going there quite a few times, and you learn quite a bit, and they have done a lot of things right. And one of the things they have done is they realized they're losing a lot of people, really highly educated people, and they need these people back at home. So they, you know, like the good Asians they are, they sat down and made a plan and are sticking to the plan on how to recruit them back. Right? But the issue there is, again, I didn't prepare this, right? The overall plan is basically bring back highly skilled Malaysians to Malaysia, right? It's simple as that. But the way they're doing it is different than the way anybody else is trying or anybody else is talking about it. And there are 3 or 4 features of this whole agenda. So the first one, if you don't remember anything from my presentation, the first thing is my tie, and the second one is the word dating game. It really is a dating game, right? The way they view it, and they're carrying it out, and I'll tell you why. But before that, the first principle that this whole thing is part of a global, bigger agenda. It's about how to turn Malaysia into a high-income economy. They have all these fancy words, but it is part of the bigger development plan, right? They have this Malaysia 2020 program, which is Vision 2020, to basically where they want to be by year 2020 and where the shortages are, right? So you just don't go out there and tell the Malaysians who are professors, entrepreneurs, and whatever, come back, please, we need you. It doesn't work that way, right? So the first thing they have to figure out where they need the people, right? Because they are realizing, and this is true for every country, there is a vicious cycle, right? If the growth slows down, right, there are fewer jobs, and especially fewer good jobs, well-paying jobs, and people leave. When people leave, then it has a negative effect on the overall long-term development, right? So the idea is to kind of reverse this trend and get the other way around, right? So people come, you create growth opportunities, new businesses, there are significant spillovers. The economy grows, there are more opportunities, and more people come, right? So this is the idea. And then figuring out where the human capital shortages are in this grand scheme. Now, what it is they're doing, so okay, the part of the thing they have done is they have these NKEAs, acronyms get a lives of their own, and I have no idea what NKEA actually opening stands for, but everybody talks about it. And now it's too late to admit to the Malaysians, I don't know what it means. But NKEA means these are the sectors which are priority for us, right? So electronics is there, a couple of the plantation sectors are there, and so on and so forth. So, and they are the areas where they really need more human capital. But they're not just going to go, again, suppose they decided electronics is one area, they're not going to go to the professors, Malaysian professors at Stanford and MIT and tell them to come. They're going to leave the selection process to the private sector, right? So basically, I'm going to get to the details of the program, but if you want to be eligible of the program to take advantage of the privileges granted by the program, you have to have a job, right? You have to be hired by the private sector. Then, so in a sense, the whole program, this Talent Corp, which is, by the way, government agency, is a partnership, the way they're seeing it, between the government, the industry, and the talent, the highly skilled people, right? So you have to have a job, you have to apply, and what the Talent Corp does is basically facilitate your ease or assimilation and provide you all these other incentives, right? It's not just opening the doors and coming back. Now, so this is the second critical part, that the selection actually is done by the private jobs. Now, these are not important. Let me go, okay, right? Now, another thing is, it's not just the Malaysians, by the way. They have two big programs within Talent Corp. One is the Malaysians, but they're also trying to recruit all these other foreigners. So if any of you are interested in jobs in Malaysia, beautiful tropical climate, no snow, you know, I can get you in touch with the right people if you happen to be in the right sector and manage to get a good job. So there is the other, basically, bringing people to Malaysia. Now, the third component of the thing is, okay, what happened? These are where the people, oh, did I skip the incentives? No, right? They're supposed to be, did I get the new? No, sorry. They have, I can't find it. All right, I'll tell you. They have specific incentives, right? This is the third big component of the program. Now, we are all, you know, in the business world, presumably, and deal with numbers. So the first incentive, the most relevant, are taxes, right? So if you manage to get into this program, get a job and accept it, there's a complicated and long application and acceptance process, you get tax benefits. For 3 or 5 years, depending on the job, you basically are subject to a really low income tax. So that's great. The second one, for those of you who know Malaysia, they have a crazy auto industry program where they have this car called the Proton, which, you know, they will admit it's a failure, but nevertheless, they have really high tax rates, import tax rates on foreign cars. So you can bring 2 cars tax-free, which is a huge benefit for a lot of these people who want to come back. And so those are, and then all the other things, whatever you want to bring as a part of your household enters tax-free. Right? Those are the 3 tax benefits, which actually, believe it or not, took a big time to negotiate with the Ministry of Finance. At the end of the day, it's actually small numbers because there's a couple thousand people, but it's the matter of the principle. And then, so those are tax benefits. The second big benefit that you get is I mean, we take it for granted. If I get a job in America and get a green card or on an H-1B visa, my family is automatically included in this visa program, right? They're eligible for the same benefits. It's not the same case in Malaysia. The citizenship and the residency laws are quite complicated for a variety of historical reasons because of the ethnic structure of Malaysia during independence, it was a sophisticated negotiation that took place, so which reflected in basically this really crazy laws. But anyway, if your family members, your wife and your children or your husband, depending on the situation, are not Malaysian citizens, they actually get fast pass and immediate residency in Malaysia, which is highly valuable. And the third benefit is they do all these really small things that matter to people who are returning, like helping with your children's schooling. Right? Those are important things. Right? So that's the third component of the program. Right? So it's part of the thing. We identify which sectors we are in. These are the sectors that we're gonna try to recruit people. But then you have to get a job in that sector, and the job has to be above a certain income level. Right? We're not just gonna take anybody random. The third thing, we're going to give you these incentives so that you can come back, you can take advantage, another additional. And the fourth part is an actually complicated application process. You have to fill out an application, basically divulge all these secrets about your life. It's not that bad, but you know, your past career. And then there's actually a panel which meets to review your application, whether if you're good enough to come back to Malaysia. Right? Then after all this said and done, you become part of the REP residence returning expats program. Right? So it is extremely labor intensive, and it is very costly. So at the end, and I don't know how scalable it is. Right? But they have been quite successful. They brought in really impressive people to the key open positions. For one of them is in the oil and gas sector. You know, there's a huge part of the economy, and they need really senior and talented management there. They managed to find people, and they found some people. Okay, I have 2 minutes left. I'll speak really fast. So they have achieved that, but the scalability is an issue, and the other one is whether the marginal cost versus the marginal benefit. That's where the World Bank comes in. We are evaluating this program. But they really put their hearts and minds into it, and they're doing it the right way. Because, I mean, I'm an expat. I go back home. Things have changed a bit. Luckily, I'm Turkish, and Turkey has improved so much in the last decade that actually people are going back, and things. But historically, it's been always like, oh, you sold out, you're a traitor. Right? That was the label. The moment I entered at the airport, there was this big thing here as a favor. We know you, who you are. Right? That's definitely not the right attitude. Right? So this is the dating game, the word dating game I was referring to. This is what the Malaysians are doing. And there are a couple of pictures here. So they have these outreach activities. The CEO of Talent Corp is this guy, Johan, who's Oxford-educated, brilliant, energetic man. And I tell him, you set up Talent Corp so you can travel abroad and schmooze with people. And this is what they are, right? They go to basically they organize all these events. They have a lot of events in Houston because they want to recruit the guys from the oil and gas sector. And then also to the universities, and even, you know, go after students. They're not going, I mean, they're kind of snobby in this respect. So they go to Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, MIT, and they try to bring people, try to sell Malaysia. But it is a dating game. That's, I mean, literally what it is. How to convince people to come back. It is not, so the career fairs they have, and I mean, it's amazing how much information they give out. The one challenge they have is related to Singapore. Anybody from Singapore before I say anything? All right. Because again, because of the historical linkages and large part of the Chinese population of Malaysia, are attracted to Singapore's incentives. Singapore has its own set of incentives, which are very impressive. Hopefully, next time when Kisley invites me, I'll talk about Singapore. And so, but they don't have access to Singapore, really. The Singaporean government is making it very difficult for them to hold any events there to bring people back. But anyway, so the whole idea, to go back, I have 25 seconds left, is that you can't just go out there and, you know, we need diaspora. They need to come back. We need them. No, because it is important to make sure they have a job. It is important to make sure they are needed and they are useful, right? It has to be a matching game, literally. You don't just marry somebody because they happen to be there or they're beautiful or this and that. It has to be really a match, because if you bring, you know, you promise these people, you make them feel guilty, and then they come back, and then it doesn't work out, and the whole thing falls apart, right? Because people talk to each other, oh, you know, I went back, and this is what happened. And this is exactly not what we want. This is the way to approach it. The two drawbacks I mentioned is whether if it's scalable. I do not know. Maybe for certain jobs in certain sectors, it will be good. The Turkish government is starting the same thing, or more or less, they're talking about for the academic jobs. There are huge shortages there. And the second thing is, it is very time and cost intensive. It requires a lot of devotion, and these guys are doing a good job, but we'll see if anybody else can replicate it. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. It's a very, very interesting sounding program, and thanks for sharing.
By the way, I forgot. The first picture there, 30 seconds. Sorry. At the airport in Kuala Lumpur, you know, there's the line you go diplomatic passport. And then there's a separate line with a red carpet. I kid you not, that's the picture. A red carpet for these people who have that visa in their passports, right? It's just to show how special and they are, and you know, to make them feel different. And it seems to work actually. And those little details seem to make a difference.
That's a great little detail. It's a great anecdote. To wrap things up, we have Eric Guichard. Eric will be sharing with us some insights from the field, as it were. I've got the timer here, and if you want, I can also kind of signal you when it's 4 minutes or so.
I've just been told that I have 5 seconds. Invariably, if you're an entrepreneur coming on the back of academics, you are going to look disorganized and less conceptual. And being the entrepreneur of the group, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to look less disorganized. And that's actually exacerbated by the fact that I was up at 4 o'clock in the morning to take my son to his crew practice in Georgetown. And I'm still confused by it, because I actually thought that the point was to row in the direction where you can actually see where you're going. At 4 o'clock in the morning, there's that much light. In any event, if I happen to fall asleep, please pinch me. The power of the diaspora, and I think the diaspora and diaspora movement is the buzz going around, whether it's within policymakers, discussions of what kind of recommendations to make to sovereigns, or whether it's in the private sector, how to create products to meet the diaspora. This is now the hot topic. And the reality is that there is a reason for that. When you look at the numbers, they are quite, quite impressive. About $500 billion, $500 billion are being officially transferred from the West to the emerging markets in terms of peer-to-peer transfer. And I say official because, I'm originally from Africa, and I happen to know that, I have relatives who take valises, and those valises have money in them, and those don't show up in the national accounts. But the numbers are amazing. You take the case of Africa, about $60 billion in 2012 alone, according to the World Bank. China, about $50 billion. I believe the Philippines, about $20 billion. India, somewhere around $30 billion, if I'm not mistaken. These are significant transfers. And so the question is, are these transfers truly only about subsistence? Are these peer-to-peer transfers simply going to finance school fees, medical supplies, and the rest? And for a very long time, that was a conventional wisdom. It was a conventional wisdom coming from the institution I hail from, the World Bank, and other academic circles. The reality is completely different. And being a practitioner or being an entrepreneur, I'm here to say that that conventional wisdom is actually passé. In fact, up to 25% of those global flows is actually seeking investment. About 2 years ago, George Washington University, sorry to mention your competitor, in conjunction with USAID and Western Union, did a study of Africans living in the U.S. and their intent to invest back home being the country from which they come from. And more than 90% of the respondents were professional Africans living and working in the U.S. for more than 15 years. More than 90% have expressed very, very high interest in investing back home, but conversely, a very, very poor experience in trying to sort out the logistics of investing back home. So whether it's through an agency relationship with a family, sending money to auntie and having auntie figure out for you what to invest in, or at the very least fulfilling your wishes, or whether it's through a broker-dealer to help you sort out your investments via listed securities, et cetera. The reality is that that agency relationship has not always been a very positive experience. The size of the African diaspora, as we know it, again, according to the World Bank, about 23 million Africans live outside of the continent. That size does not take into account the intra-diaspora, i.e. Nigerians living in South Africa, Kenyans, living in Liberia, who themselves also send money back home. And that number is significantly larger than the one we're talking about here. Getting back to that study very quickly, some of the key findings that helped us establish the basis for launching a business were a couple of were the following. The first one was, when asked to list what are the things that the diaspora would like to invest in, they listed a fairly wide range of asset classes, so from personal real estate to commercial real estate to making loans, i.e. whether it was above market, at market, or below market, but the activity of lending their capital reserve was something that they wanted to do. Investing in exporting businesses and small and medium-sized enterprises. And the bar charts on that reply were very high. The average was in excess of 60% of respondents for each one of the categories. You looked at the second chart right after that, which was, having said what you want to do, what have you been able to accomplish? You had a massive dichotomy between those two. Basically stated that there is a structural impediment between their desire to make a difference or contribute to making a difference back home and their ability to do so. And for us, that spelled opportunity. In addition, about 80% of the respondents suggested that they use the internet to find information about what's going on back home, but also to try to identify investment opportunities. So therefore, for us, that meant that whatever the proposition is that we were to make to facilitate that intermediation, that had to be a web-based proposition. Last but not least, and again, this goes against one of the other conventional wisdoms, which is that the diaspora sends money, to assist primarily. When asked what are the main priorities in seeking investment, number one of the four was making money. Financial motive, number one. Followed very quickly, I will admit, by the desire to support and help the country, help the family, help the village. And then third, a recognition or status, recognition for having contributed, and last but not least, a voice mechanism, the ability to influence policy making. So for us, the challenge was, how do you set up a web-based proposition that addresses all of those four elements? And so, from that analysis, we came up with Home Strings, which is a web-based proposition that lists private deals in a catalog, structured as funds in which the diaspora actually purchases micro-limited partnerships in specific transactions. The transactions range from residential real estate projects to commercial real estate projects to infrastructure projects to transport projects, and last but not least, healthcare projects. We currently have about 50 projects on the platform. Since February of 2012, we've invested about $25 million. We've also attracted institutional diaspora, which was surprising to us, and obviously non-diaspora investors as well. The next element for us is, having had that experience, can you truly crowdfund development? And I think for us, that is a disruptive thought, because when you look at the lay of the land of those who are currently financing development, to introduce the notion that there is a third source of financing that is, in fact, transformative. Take the case of Israel bonds. I actually went to Israel and looked at some of the projects that the Israeli diaspora has financed. If you were to take that concept of adding a new player in the realm of development finance, you actually have a very, very strong case for the diaspora. The key issue here is, how do you facilitate within the existing parameters, how do you facilitate those kinds of investments? And I tell you, one of the biggest challenges that we have found, ironically, is the regulatory regime in the host country, right? The ability to have an Ethiopian here finance a dam in Ethiopia requires that individual, under SEC rules, and even worse under Dodd-Frank, to be a high net worth individual, i.e. to have in excess of $1 million, excluding primary residence, talk about closing the wealth gap, and having those individuals be able to participate in that financing. So our argument to USAID and the World Bank is, you currently are living within significant sovereign fiscal tightness. Why not facilitate, through regulatory changes, the ability to tap into these pools of capital to finance some of these infrastructure projects where people actually want to participate, so long as the proposition is not only transformative, but it's also profitable. And the response I've gotten is that that's a long road to hoe. But I will say this, though. There is regulatory disparity among the Western regions. So, for example, the UK defines a sophisticated investor as somebody who actually works in the financial industry, whether or not they have wealth. They actually have 5 categories which you can choose from, whereas the U.S. only has one. So, and we are taking advantage of that. HomeStream is actually based in London. Some of the transactions that we've done, just to give you a sense, Rwanda just launched a $400 million Eurobond to finance continued growth and infrastructure. HomeStrings has actually listed that and has invested in that bond. Senegal launched a Eurobond to finance a toll road in the capital. We actually purchased that. We actually encouraged the launching of domestic currency bonds, both in terms of participating in the deepening of local capital markets, but also in terms of having the diaspora support local currency issuances. And we have several of those. So Kenya launched an infrastructure bond about 2 years ago, which was oversubscribed, I think, 4 or 5 times. So did Zambia and a couple of others, actually, I can't think of. Some of the projects that we have in the pipeline, we're looking at centers of excellence in executive education, in healthcare, in transport and logistics, and in financing intra-commerce, i.e. financing an interstate highway system and rail system that facilitates the trading between countries. So the one paradigm is export-led growth. The other one is interstate commerce. And if you look at, for example, the U.S., interstate commerce to the U.S. exceeds anything that the U.S. has done externally. For every dollar the U.S. has invested in the interstate highway system, they actually have earned $6 in return, simply from the taxes that they got from activities around the interstate highway system. That's something that the diaspora is very, very keen in co-financing. Last but not least, we're rolling out into other regions. So we're looking at offering private equity opportunities and co-investments in China. We're looking at waste management in the Caribbean and expanding our network of investors, and then also rolling out some new products such as mobile banking, insurance, and project management. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really fascinating, exciting company, and I hope it's something that we get to talk a bit more about during the Q&A as well. So we have we've got about 15 minutes for Q&A, and does anybody want to lead off with a? Yeah.
Again, my name is Ashay Doshi, and I'm an undergraduate finance major at Maryland. I was reading an article recently in The Economist which said one of the biggest exports of America is hope. Like, hope in the sense everyone offers people from other countries hope to come and harbor their entrepreneurship dreams, and it's a mutually beneficial society where America also benefits from them. But the volatile job market as of now is ranging between 7.9 and 7.7. So the common man always expresses that immigrants are sort of like taking our jobs, and that's sort of the common perception, which is forcing Congress in turn to rethink immigration laws, which has been in the news recently. So how much do you think it's a conflict of interest in terms of social progress versus economic progress worldwide? Like, because America is the center of, as you say, hope and entrepreneurship in the world.
Do you want to just direct that to the panel, or
just anyone?
Would anybody like to pick up on that?
I'll answer. How do you turn it? This? It's on already? Oh, all right. Look, this is the million-dollar question. There's huge debate in the academic literature on the impact of immigrants on especially the labor markets.
I can give you the references, you can check them out, but that's beyond the, I mean, it's not a settled question. My gut feeling is the overall effect is positive. That's what I think most of the evidence is indicating. But there are two job categories where the immigrants have the highest ratio in the United States. One is fruit pickers, and the other one is engineering professors. Right? So that's the nature of the US labor market. The two ends are empty, and the demand is there, and that's where they're filling it up. So are the immigrants taking the jobs from the natives? Yes, from some natives, probably. But you know, you look at the overall thing. Is trade good, international trade good or bad? Well, it probably hurts somebody, especially if you're competing with cheap foreigners. But there's also the consumer, right? We always, always, always forget the consumer in this debate. Thanks to the immigrants, female labor participation ratio or the fertility rates in the US are much higher because women can hire nannies and have cleaning ladies, where, you know, a lot of the evidence is emerging in Europe. That's part of the reason of the decline of fertility rates, right? So, yes, some people are losing jobs, but that's not the whole economy. You should always, always look at the demand side. And I think if you take that into account, I have no doubt immigration has benefited greatly in the US economy and for everywhere. But, you know, there's always going to be a loser. There's always going to be one loser because you lost a CEO job to a foreigner, right? But look at the overall picture. It's a general equilibrium effect. It's not a partial equilibrium effect.
Okay. Thank you, Chala. Bill, did you want to?
Yeah, let me just add one or two comments there. And I agree with the overall depiction of the literature, both in terms of its some of the ambiguous findings that are out there, but also in terms of I think the overall message that I follow along with Caglar on the general positive aspects. The entrepreneurship that we've been talking about today, that's highly linked to the job creation, to the innovation that is going to fuel growth. And we can't resolve every potential job loss or displacement or retraining or potential age aspects of this relationship, but this is the one place where we need to look for hope. And with respect to a little bit of this notion of the United States as emitting hope, it's also helpful for us to remember that U.S. immigration law is actually among the most difficult out there in terms of high-skilled immigration, particularly around entrepreneurship. There's other countries that are, and Malaysia is one example, but even Chile and some others are aggressively pursuing foreign entrepreneurs to come to their countries and help the development of them that way. In part because, in Chile's example, they actually don't have a diaspora. And they have temporary programs that they want to bring people in just so that they can look down 5 years down the line and say, now we have people in Silicon Valley that have spent a year in Chile and have some sort of attachment to the country or have some knowledge about it, and that's going to provide us some opportunities later.
Great. I see a hand in the back. So, in the pink, yeah, you in the pink jacket. Is there a mic that we can?
Hi, this question is specifically for Mr. Eric. I'm very excited about the work that you're doing and the company that you have. And I have two questions. So the first, in the instance where you have the requirement for the high net worth individual to make the investment in Ethiopia, how were you able to overcome it? Did you have to is there an ability to pool resources together, so a number of different individuals to then satisfy that high net worth requirement? And that sort of trickles into the next question that I have, which is, I'm from Ghana, West Africa. I'm an MBA student, very interested in how to get sort of the middle, what it sounds like you're doing is really getting the middle layer, the upper middle class organizations to sort of invest back in that have gone abroad and other things. Speaking with Sir Sam Jonah, which you may know, and what he's been doing with private equity, and he had said, well, it would be fascinating in terms of infrastructure projects for us, people like me and other company owners, to invest back, but it can't be me putting my 15 million in and then another year from now putting another 15 million in. We really need a movement, and it sounds like that's what you're doing. And so he says, okay, let's organize. I say, would you be amenable to organizing an African business summit where we can get these people together in a room and talk about how this can be done? And he said, absolutely, but in our opinion, these efforts are futile because people talk, and then nothing gets done. So I want you to speak a little bit to that in terms of how you are able to really garner the support and efforts into this and create those, make people feel a sense of incentive for their own country investment. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Thanks for the question. I'm going to take this. The high net worth constraint is a difficult one for an organization just starting out, but is not insurmountable. So let me just address the regulatory constraint in of itself. You talked about being able to pool individuals. Under the current regulatory regime, pooling of individuals is not necessarily the solution, because the SEC actually looks through the pool to determine whether each individual within the pool actually qualifies as a sophisticated investor. So that necessarily doesn't work. The issue here is public versus private transaction, right? And I think that's where the opportunity lies. So the solution that the path that we've identified is one in which we create theme-based closed-end funds and then list them on the exchange, and then have a broker-dealer arm distribute them specifically to the diaspora. So an example would be, we would create a healthcare, African healthcare closed-end fund that will invest in private transactions, but the fund itself will be listed, and its net asset value would fluctuate depending on what the underlying valuations are of the specific deals. So we have a series of baskets that we're thinking about. So healthcare, commercial real estate. In fact, we're in the process of designing a real estate investment trust, a regional real estate investment trust that covers Kenya, Nigeria, and Ghana, and then subsequently is broken out into country-specific REITs. So, and then those will be offered specifically to each member of the diaspora. That path, although seemingly the Holy Grail, is actually expensive. And so, we are looking at ways to finance that. One of the thresholds that we've thought about is once we get to 100 transactions, 100 deals on the platform, that gives us sufficient fodder to create these baskets. And so we're halfway there. In the meantime, we're complaining about the regulatory regime, hoping that someone will pick up on that. With respect to Ghana, of the 3 or 4 major diaspora groups in Africa, Ghana is probably the most active. I remember when we listed the Ghana 3-year note paying 21% in local currency in Cedi. In that one day, we had 40 Ghanaians register on the platform. So the power of social networks combined with crowdfunding is just amazing. And I actually do think that crowdfunding for development is actually going to be disruptive. It may get us into trouble with certain policymakers, but I think it's here to stay, whether the U.S. decides to catch up in terms of crowdfunding for equity or not. Specifically in Ghana, we're looking at a couple of transactions that are really, really exciting, that are actually coming out of the country itself. So, for example, Apollonia City, King City, are projects that are urbanization projects that are run by local municipalities under a public-private partnership, and we are facilitating the financing of part of those components. So those projects have been broken up into several components: commercial real estate, roads, residential real estate, etc. And then those, not to get too technical, but those projects are then being financed through the issuance of bonds, privately placed on the platform, sold to Ghanaians and other interested parties on the platform. We're doing similarly in Kenya with Tattoo City and this very exciting concept called Konza City, which would be the sort of savannah valley, if you will, an equivalent of Silicon Valley. And as you know, Kenya has taken a huge leap forward in terms of IT and mobile banking. Bloomberg, in fact, had a story on it yesterday.
Okay.